If you've watched any of my videos before where I've mentioned some of the missing episodes or stories that I wanted to see get the animation treatment, you will know that Fury from the Deep has been at the top of my list, and I've been super massively excited to actually see an animated version of Fury from the Deep. I mean, obviously I would rather see the original version, but if we can only get an animated version, then I'm down for it. So the question is, does Fury from the Deep, as a story, as an animation, does it live up to the hype and does it live up to the expectations? Honestly, no. Now, I'm going to start off this review by saying something first and foremost. Like, I get that some people are going to say, well, it's a story that we were never going to get back, more than likely, and this is the best possible version of it that we are going to get, so you should just be grateful. And I get that, and I understand that, and I know that a lot of hard work and time and effort went into making this, and I know that some people will say that this review might come across as entitled or anything like that, but at the end of the day, I can only judge the final product on the merit of the final product. So I'm not just going to praise it just because we have it, because if it isn't up to scratch, then it's not up to scratch, plain and simply. And I do understand that there are other mitigating factors, whether it is time constraints, whether it is budget, whether it is limitations of the actual footage and still images that they had from back in the day. Admittedly, again, part of this will probably stem from the fact that my expectations as a fan for this story were incredibly high. So the fact that this didn't meet my expectations isn't necessarily a bad thing, because they were up there anyway. I was expecting this to be like my favourite Troughton story straight out of gate. So first and foremost, we'll go with the animation. Overall, the animation is okay. That's the best I can say about it. It isn't awful, but it isn't perfect either. Annoyingly, I would say out of the ones that we have had, this is lower down in terms of the actual quality of animation that we have had. I think the Macra Terror is probably the best one that we have had so far. This one was a bit static in places, I've got to admit. The character design for the most part is okay. I think Troughton especially looks really, really good. Like facially, I mean, you can see it on the cover here, like Troughton, I'll just zoom in on that. Troughton looks really good. Jamie and Zoe, however, no, not Zoe. Obviously it doesn't look like Zoe because it's Victoria. But either way, I don't think that they look like the characters that they're supposed to be. And throughout this entire story, you've got other characters who, I mean, I have Googled images of the cast. The majority of them, yeah, they work perfectly fine. Some of them, iffy. One of them in particular, which I'll get into in a bit, are a bit dodgy. But for the most part, character designs are okay. The arms are quite long though. Like weirdly, everybody has got incredibly long arms. It's like they've all turned into Mr. Fantastic. It's weird. It's not all the time, but it is noticeable. Now, I did mention about the animation being static. The frustrating thing is there are certain scenes, I mean, look, there's very little of Fury from the Deep that still exists. However, from the stuff that I have seen, and I imagine you guys watching will have seen as well, it is an extra on the DVD, the existing footage. There's also still images. I've seen comparison shots of different moments or different scenes, and frankly, the animation is lazy in the sense that the character models are basically in the default, as in they're just sort of stood there, arms by the side, sort of legs straight down or anything. They're not doing anything. There's a scene where I think it's like the cliffhanger to part 5 maybe? Part 4 or 5? Either way, it's later on in the story, where the characters all walk into a room and they get ambushed, and it's like, this is it, the Battle of the Giants. The dialogue is a bit like that. Now in the original, the Doctor has got Victoria in his arms, and the group of people are sort of surrounded by them, and they're all sort of close in one another. In the animation, they're all stood in a line, and it's just it's things like that that's kind of like, that doesn't seem natural. And I know it sounds like a nitpicky thing, like, what do you mean they're stood in a line and they're not huddled together? What difference does it make? But it's just little things like that where it's like, why didn't they do that? Like, I've seen the image of that from the original. Surely they did as well. It's just, it doesn't look the best. Not only that, but the infamous moment from Fury from the Deep is one of the few existing clips, thankfully, where the two guys, one of them is called Mr. Quill, I can't remember the name of the other guy off the top of my head, but either way, they're in this woman's house, Mrs. Harris, and they go in and they open their mouths and gas comes out, and it's a really creepy moment. It's a really, really creepy moment in the story. If you haven't seen it, check it out, like the original version, because it is terrifying, even for classic 1960s Doctor Who. It still is quite creepy in a 2020 world. And the thing is, like I say, that scene exists. I've seen it, it's on YouTube. But the scene in the actual animation is totally different, and not in a good way. It's not as effective. And people might say, well, it is animation, you are going to lose something. But the difference is, Mr. Quill, who I think is the taller one, he's quite a creepy looking dude, and the reason why that scene is as creepy as it is because he looks so creepy. In this, he looks like a Scooby-Doo villain. In fact, both of them do. He looks like a proper goofball. Like, they have multiple scenes of him smiling and his teeth are proper like, grr. It's well weird. Fury from the Deep is known as like a proper creepy story, but I don't get creepiness from this story. I get Scooby-Doo. Like halfway through the story, I was expecting at the end that they'd take off the seaweed's mask and it'd be Mr. Quill all along. Like, that's the level of the animation in this story at times. And when I see that the most infamous scene and the scariest scene that we know of, or that exists at least, has not been done in the same way. I mean, they add gas coming from the mouths, which I think is quite cool. But there's like this weird overlapping effect that for me really makes that scene. And they don't do it in here. It's just two guys stood with their mouths open, with sort of ripples coming out of the mouths for the gas, which admittedly, like I say, is quite good. But it makes you think, if that moment isn't the same, or isn't as effective as the original, what's everything else going to be like? And it throws in your mind doubts about how effective this animation is at portraying the story itself. It's perfectly serviceable. It is essentially more or less there. Like, the characters are in the right places, doing the right things, etc. But it's not as creepy as I thought it was going to be. And I think part of that is probably down to the animation. Is the animation flat out terrible? Absolutely not. But it's serviceable, and that's the best I can say about it. Moving on to the actual story then. Now, again, it's not just the animation. I know I have been overly critical of the animation. I understand, as I said at the beginning of this review, that, you know, there are mitigating factors about the quality of the animation, whether it is the budget, the time constraints, etc, etc. However, the story itself is also not as good as I thought it was going to be. I was expecting it to be instantly my favourite Patrick Troughton story, again, like I said before, and it just isn't. Part 1 and 2 kind of drag for me, actually. There's a lot of filler in part 1 and 2. There's a character, again, I can't remember his name. He's a Dutch fella though. Let's just call him Van Persie. So Van Persie is this character that essentially plays the role that the Doctor would usually take in a story like this, where he's butting heads with the head of the Institute, who doesn't believe that anything is actually going on, and he's like, no, you must listen to me, this is actually what's going on, you need to be careful, you're an imbecile, you're an idiot, blah blah blah. And then he gets killed off in like part 3, part 4, something like that. Obviously the Doctor wouldn't get killed off at part 3 or 4, but the point is, the lines of dialogue that he has before his death, you could have easily had the Doctor giving those lines, and you save a hell of a lot of time, and you also have the Doctor doing more in this story. Funnily enough, Patrick Troughton doesn't really have a lot to do in this story. He's not a major part of the story. He kind of feels like a background character, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is obviously Victoria's final story, so at least she gets time to shine, but the Doctor is very much in the background, and having this Van Persie character, I'd laugh if his name actually is Robin Van Persie now. It isn't, but it'd be funny if it was. People out there who aren't fans of football are just like, I don't know, who's Robin Van Persie? Either way, the Dutch guy, he didn't need to be in this story. He's just a bit of a wasted character. He's taking up screen time that could have been used better elsewhere, essentially. After that though, the story does pick up a bit of pace. There's still a few moments here and there though where I am just sort of like, that's a bit lackluster. So if you've seen my review of The Faceless Ones, you will know that I said overall it's a decent story, however the ending is a little bit rushed. I would give the general vibe of Fury from the Deep a similar sort of thing. However, I will say that the ending isn't as rushed. It could have been handled better. So for example, there is multiple different oil rigs that have been taken over by these seaweed characters or monsters, the main villain of the piece, from the deep, and it's Fury. And so yeah, they find out that Victoria's Scream is something that affects them and it harms them, which is really cool. So the Doctor's just like, okay, well let's use these then. They're in one place and they use these amplifiers, I would assume, to affect the seaweed, and it just disappears and whatnot, and it's like, okay, cool. Whether or not the story expands on this, I'm not 100% sure. I didn't pick up on it, so if I'm wrong on this, then fair enough. However, it was a simple case of, right, well where we are, it's sorted, but everywhere else, there's still a shit ton of seaweed. But they get in contact with someone who is on one of those oil rigs, and it's like, nope, everything's fine now. And in my head, I was like, ah, okay, he's just pretending. He's still going to be under their control. No, everything just is fine now. And that was a little bit lackluster. Again, if they do explain that it was being broadcast into all the different oil rigs, and that's fine. But even still, I would have liked a little bit more in the resolution. Also, when it comes to Victoria's scream being the solution, the Doctor takes way too fucking long to figure that out. Like, there is literally a scene in the TARDIS where they have a sample of the seaweed and the Doctor's just like, oh, it's retreated into itself. I wonder why that was. Literally after Victoria has just screamed. I know this is one of your early incarnations, Doctor, but come on, even you're not that stupid. I mean, we mentioned Robin Van Persie before, but some of the characters in this story are actually quite good. I really enjoy them. I mean, I did moan about the animated versions of them, but Mr. Quill and the other guy, I do like them. I like the fact that they're puppets for the seaweed. And also, there's a Dr. Harris and his wife. They play a really good role in the story. Robson, who is like the main guy at the Institute, he has a really good story arc. I enjoy him slowly descending into madness. It's not quite as good as Lesterson in Power of the Daleks, but it's still pretty good. There's a moment as well that I thought, this shows how sick I actually am, because there's a moment where, to travel to another oil rig, Mrs. Harris, who is under the control of the seaweed, goes out into the ocean, and part of me was just like, because they never would do this, it would have been so cool and grim if the seaweed just used her body to help them get there, almost like driving a car essentially. But obviously she can't breathe underwater, so it would have been cool if she just drowns along the way and it's just a corpse that turns up, they're just steering it. I thought that would have been quite cool. That's an idea that is too dark for Doctor Who, and has also exposed my weird inner demon nature. We'll move on, but either way, I thought that would have been a really cool and dark idea to incorporate into this story. Victoria's exit, that's handled really, really well. It's kind of new series, actually, because it is a little bit drawn out, but it needs to be. Throughout the entire story, she is umming and ahhing about, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And I like the way that it ends, you know, it's not a simple case of, look, Doctor, I want to leave, and the Doctor's like, okay, see you in a bit. With this, he's like, okay, well, only if you're sure, like, we're gonna stay an extra night, so if you still feel the same way that you do, you know, then you can stay behind, but we're gonna let you sleep on it. And I thought that's a really nice way of doing things. Contrast this to the Faceless Ones with Ben and Polly's exit. It's the exact opposite. It's done so much better. It's really heartfelt, it's really meaningful, and whether or not you like Victoria as a character or not, doesn't matter. They handle her departure perfectly. The sound design, the music throughout this entire story is fantastic as well. It is probably one of the more atmospheric scores that I've heard in a Doctor Who story for a long time. It's really good. I love the pulsing noise, the heartbeat almost sound of the seaweed. It's a really good score and really atmospheric. It's just, like I say, unfortunate that the animation doesn't quite deliver on what I thought it would. Maybe it's my fault, you know, with my expectations being too high. But then again, like I said, there are moments with the animation where it's like, I have literally seen that clip for real. The animation just needed a little bit more to it. It needed to be polished a little bit more. It's very reminiscent of the original Power of the Daleks release, where it's not awful, it's just, it just needs something more. So overall, I'm gonna give Fury from the Deep, as a whole package, 7 out of 10. I was leaning on an 8 after I initially watched it, but the more I've thought about it, the more I've just been like, yeah, no, it's just above average for me. Let me know what you think. Did you enjoy Fury from the Deep? Did you have some of the same problems as me? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it, subscribe for more. Social media and Patreon links will be in the description as always. So if you'd follow me on any of those things, I'd absolutely love you forever. And also guys, if you're interested in more Fury from the Deep stuff, as I just mentioned, my Patreon is in the description. Today, the same day that this has gone up, I will also be uploading an unboxing video of the DVD for Fury from the Deep. So if you want to check that out, because I've done unboxing videos before and I do reviews of individual Doctor Who stories as well, then sign up over there and come join us on there and see what it's about. But until next time guys, I will see you all in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.